He thought he was just picking up a freezing dog left behind in the snow. But the dog didn't cry, didn't run, only stood there like it was waiting for something that never came. That silence followed him home, and into a truth the entire town had buried for years. Because this wasn't just a lost dog, it was a trail leading back to a night no one dared to talk about, a missing girl, a broken rescue station, and a past that reached closer than he ever expected. The deeper he followed, the more he realized this dog wasn't saved by chance. It was sent to find him. So what would you feel if one moment changed everything you believed? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. Morning arrived over Red Pine Inlet with a brightness that felt almost dishonest. The blizzard had passed in the night, leaving the northern town buried beneath a clean, merciless white. Sunlight spilled across the frozen lake and the high drifts along the pines, turning the world silver blue and beautiful in a way that made people forget for a moment how quickly winter could kill. The roofs of cabins glittered under ice. The narrow road curling along the ridge had vanished under packed snow except for two dark channels where tires had cut through before dawn. Nothing moved, nothing called. Even the wind had gone quiet, as if the storm had spent itself and left silence behind as a warning. Wyatt Calder drove through that silence in an old pickup the color of weathered iron. At 40, Wyatt still carried the lean, efficient build of a man who had spent most of his life trusting endurance more than comfort. He stood just over 6 feet tall, with a body shaped by years of disciplined strain rather than vanity. Strong shoulders, a hard waist, long, powerful arms. His face was clean-shaven, leaving his square jaw and pronounced cheekbones exposed to the pale light. His dark brown hair was cut in a military style, neat but slightly longer than regulation had once allowed, and the cold northern years had roughened his light skin into something wind-burnished and permanent. His eyes, gray-blue and habitually alert, were the kind that noticed things before they moved. He wore what he always wore in winter, a worn olive-gray tactical combat shirt under a heavy outer layer, faded brown-green combat pants, softened by age, old military work boots, and the same scratched watch he had trusted in deserts half a world away. Nothing about him suggested a man interested in being seen. He lived above the town in a timber cabin, repaired engines and generators when people asked, and passed through Red Pine Inlet the way some men pass through church cemeteries. Respectful, quiet, and never longer than necessary. He was halfway down the ridge, thinking about fuel, roof cable, and whether the next storm would finish off the western shingles when he saw it. At first he thought it was a stump or a sack of debris blown from someone's truck and frozen into the shoulder of the road. Then the shape shifted. Not much, just enough. Wyatt eased off the gas. A German shepherd stood near the edge of the ridge where the forest opened briefly toward the lake. Snow had drifted around the dog's legs almost to the knees. Ice clung in thin, brittle lines beneath the chest and along the fur of the lower jaw. Its coat, black over the back and dark gold along the neck and legs, had been dusted white until the animal looked half-carved from the storm itself. One ear stood sharp. The left ear bent slightly at the tip as if it had once healed wrong. Around its neck was a worn, dark brown leather collar. The dog did not bark. It did not run from the truck. It did not rush toward it either. It simply stood there, rigid with cold, staring past the road into the line of pines as if waiting for someone late enough to become a memory. Wyatt stopped the truck. He did not move right away. Years of military work had sharpened his instincts into something quieter than fear and faster than thought. Observe first, advance second. He cracked the door and stepped into the cold. The air hit his face like ground glass. "Easy," he said, though the dog had not shown any sign of panic. Up close, the animal looked older than a pup. 4, maybe 5 years old, but underweight and drawn tight by exposure. A working-line shepherd, Wyatt guessed. Compact, balanced, built for endurance. Not wild, not stray, at least not originally. The dog's muscles were trembling hard enough to show through the snow-crusted coat. But even then it fought to hold itself upright. There was discipline in that posture. Or fear. Sometimes they looked the same. Wyatt crouched, slow enough not to crowd him. The dog turned its head then. The eyes were dark and startlingly focused. No frantic darting, no desperate appeal, just measurement. That was the part that stopped Wyatt somewhere deeper than reason. Most abandoned animals cried, lunged, flinched, begged. This one endured. "You should be making noise," Wyatt murmured. The dog's nostrils flared once, catching the scents of old leather, engine oil, wool, cold metal, and the human steadiness Wyatt never advertised but animals sometimes recognized before people did. The shepherd took one stiff step, nearly slipped, corrected, and stood again. Wyatt shrugged off his outer field jacket and wrapped it around the dog before the animal could decide whether to resist. The body under the coat was colder than he expected. Not dead cold. Not yet. But close enough that another 15 minutes out here might have changed that. The dog tensed when Wyatt lifted him, then went still. No growl, no whine, no struggle. That silence struck Wyatt harder than it should have. He carried the shepherd to the truck and settled him across the passenger seat. The dog remained curled for only a moment before pushing himself upright again, wrapped in olive fabric, facing the rear window, watching the road behind them. Wyatt shut his door, started the engine, and looked once more toward the trees where the shepherd had been staring. There was nothing there now except sunlight on snow and the dark vertical lines of pine trunks. Still, a small, unwelcome feeling settled at the base of his neck. He drove. The cabin sat alone above the frozen lake, tucked into a stand of tall pines where the land sloped steeply toward the white valley below. It was modest but solid. Dark timber, stone chimney, practical porch. No decoration except the marks weather had carved into the wood over the years. Wyatt had bought it because it was quiet and because quiet, after enough time in war and enough time after war, could begin to feel like oxygen. Inside, the air held the deep cold stillness of a house waiting to be lived in. Wyatt built the fire fast. He moved the way capable men did when no one was watching. No wasted motion, no hesitation, only the direct sequence of one necessary thing after another. He brought warm water in a metal bowl, found old towels, cleared a blanket near the hearth. The dog stepped down from the truck with careful stiffness and followed him in. That too was strange. Not the following, the restraint. A frightened animal might bolt through the open door, circle wildly, sniff every corner in panic. This shepherd entered the cabin, scanned it once, and chose his place near the front door instead of the fireplace. From there he could see the room, the windows, and the threshold. Wyatt noticed. He knelt and began drying the dog's coat. Under the melted snow, the sable black and gold fur showed richer color. The chest was broad, the muzzle narrow and intelligent. A faint old scar cut through the thicker fur near the shoulder. The dog endured the towel the same way he had endured the storm, quietly, as if complaint had once cost him something. "Who had you?" Wyatt asked, not expecting an answer. The shepherd lowered his head to the water bowl and drank in controlled swallows, pausing between them to glance up. Not fear exactly. Permission checking. Habit. Wyatt sat back on his heels. That was when the first real unease stirred. He had worked beside military dogs before. He knew the difference between intelligence and training. Knew what it looked like when an animal had learned to monitor human movement as if the room itself had rule. This dog was not fully trained, not polished or command perfect. But some lessons had been written into him hard enough to survive cold, abandonment, and shock. Wyatt rose, went to the kitchen, and opened a can of stew for himself without much appetite. He found leftover venison, warmed it, and placed a small portion in a dish near the blanket. The shepherd approached the food, stopped, looked at Wyatt again, then ate. That made Wyatt set the spoon down. For a brief second, an old memory surfaced, one he had spent years keeping locked where daylight could not touch it. A young Marine on his first deployment. Silent after the explosion. Sitting upright, though blood ran into his gloves, not asking for help because he had learned too early that pain did not change orders. Wyatt shut that memory down with practiced force. He ate in silence. The dog stayed by the door. By late afternoon, light slanted pale gold through the windows and turned the cabin walls honey warm. Outside, the lake shone under the sky like hammered steel. Inside, the fire settled into a steady crackle. Wyatt had almost convinced himself the morning had been simple, a rescue, nothing more, when the dog rose suddenly and went still, not barking, not moving, listening. Wyatt followed the line of the shepherd's body, ears forward, muscles tight, eyes on the front window. There was no vehicle on the road below, no bootsteps on the porch, only a gust of wind brushing powder from the pine branches. Yet the dog remained fixed there, staring into the bright emptiness beyond the glass, low and silent, as if he recognized something Wyatt couldn't hear. For 3 long seconds the cabin felt inhabited by more than 2 living things. Then the shepherd blinked, stepped back, and lay down again. The moment passed, but not entirely. Wyatt looked at the dog and felt, against his better judgment, that the animal had not been searching for danger. He had been waiting for it. The thought stayed with Wyatt through dusk, through feeding the stove, through checking the roofline from the porch, through the slow settling of cold around the house after dark. By the time night deepened over Red Pine Inlet, he told himself he was tired and nothing more. He took the armchair beside the fire with an old repair manual open on his lap. The dog remained near the door, head resting on crossed paws, one eye half open in the shifting orange light. Sometime after midnight, Wyatt drifted. Sleep did what it sometimes did. It opened a door he had not invited. Heat, rotor wash, sand in his teeth. Someone shouting coordinates twice, then silence where a voice should have been. A hand slipping out of his grip. The same question returning with the old, unbearable simplicity. If he had chosen differently, would the kid have lived? Wyatt jerked in the chair, not from the dream itself, from pressure against his boot. His eyes snapped open to darkness, firelight, and the shepherd standing beside him. The dog had placed one paw lightly against Wyatt's leg, no whining, no frantic licking, just that one deliberate touch. For a second Wyatt could not move. The room was still halfway full of the desert. His heart beat too hard. The cabin walls seemed too small around him. Then the dog sat back and watched. The storm in Wyatt's chest eased by degrees. He exhaled, dragged a hand over his face, and let the dream retreat. "You heard that one too, huh?" he muttered. The shepherd's ear twitched. Wyatt leaned forward then, really looking at him in the glow from the dying fire. The leather collar was old, cracked near the buckle. Something orange, half hidden under the fur, caught the light. He reached carefully, expecting resistance. The dog stayed still. Wyatt drew out a short strip of torn orange cloth tied into the collar ring. A small metal tag, no bigger than 2 fingers laid together, hung from it. It was not an owner's tag, no address, no phone number. The metal looked hand-cut, not store-bought. On one side, scratched deep enough to survive weather, were 4 characters, S9-17. For a moment, Wyatt only stared. The fire shifted in the grate. Outside, a branch released snow in a soft collapse against the roof. S9. The cabin seemed to tilt, not in truth, but in memory. He had heard those initials only once in his life, and not as initials. He had been a boy standing in a kitchen, gone too quiet, watching grown men keep their hats in their hands while his mother stared at the floor because looking up would make it real. Someone had said Station 9 in a low voice, followed by a winter accident, followed by the kind of silence adults use when they decide a child is nearby. And grief must be rearranged into smaller words. Wyatt had never forgotten the name. The town had, or pretended to. He looked from the tag to the dog. The shepherd met his gaze with the same unreadable steadiness he had shown on the roadside, in the truck, by the door, and beside the chair. Not pleading, not grateful, waiting. Something old and unwanted moved in Wyatt's chest then. Not hope, not yet, but the dangerous possibility of meaning. He closed his fingers around the tag, and for the first time since lifting the dog from the snow, Wyatt understood with cold certainty that this had not been chance. Morning in Red Pine Inlet carried a different kind of silence than the ridge. It wasn't the clean, untouched quiet of snow and forest. It was a human silence, thin, strained, built from things left unsaid. Wyatt Calder noticed it the moment he stepped out of his truck. The town sat low along the frozen lake, a scattering of wood buildings, a gas station, a general store, a diner with fogged windows, and a radio tower that cut a sharp line into the pale sky. Smoke rose from chimneys in slow gray ribbons. The winter festival banners, bright reds and faded blues, hung stiff between poles, unmoving in the cold air. It looked like a place trying to convince itself that life here was simple. Wyatt didn't believe in simple. Fenn stepped down from the passenger side, landing carefully on the packed snow. The German shepherd moved with more strength than the day before, though his body still carried stiffness from the cold. His black and tan coat caught the light now that it was clean, and the slight bend at the tip of his left ear gave him a distinct, almost recognizable profile. The worn leather collar rested against his neck. The orange strip and metal tag tucked beneath the fur. Fenn didn't wander. He stayed close to Wyatt's leg, eyes moving, not nervously but with quiet calculation. Wyatt rested a hand briefly against the dog's shoulder. "Just looking," he muttered. Whether he meant the dog or himself, even he wasn't sure. The general store smelled like coffee, dust, and old wood that had seen too many winters. A bell chimed softly when Wyatt pushed the door open. Inside, a handful of locals moved slowly through aisles stocked with canned goods, rope, batteries, and tools. Conversations dropped a fraction, not stopped, just lowered, as Wyatt stepped in. That happened sometimes. Outsiders, even long-term ones like him, shifted the air. Fenn entered beside him without hesitation, then paused just inside the doorway, scanning. Not sniffing, not exploring, watching. Wyatt moved toward the counter. Behind it stood a man in his late 50s, broad through the chest with a belly softened by years of standing in one place. His name tag read Harlan Givens. His hair was thinning, gray at the temples, and his mustache was thick and carefully kept. His eyes, however, were sharper than the rest of him suggested. Quick, observant. The kind of eyes that tracked more than they spoke about. "Morning," Harlan said, voice steady but cautious. Wyatt set the small metal tag on the counter. "Found a dog up the ridge," he said. "Wearing this. Means anything to you?" Harlan didn't touch it at first. He leaned forward just enough to read the engraving. His eyes paused, only a fraction of a second, but long enough for Wyatt to see it. Then the man straightened. "Could be anything," Harlan said. "Folks carve all sorts of marks." Wyatt didn't respond right away. "Right," he said eventually. A woman near the coffee machine, mid-40s, tall and thin, with sun-creased skin and blonde hair tied back loosely, glanced over. Her expression shifted when she saw the tag, not fear, recognition. Then she looked away. Wyatt picked up the tag. Fenn shifted slightly closer to his leg. The silence in the room deepened, not louder but heavier. The gas station sat just across the road. Wyatt filled the truck slowly, watching reflections in the glass. People noticed. People always noticed. What mattered was how long they pretended not to. A voice came from behind him. "That mark's older than most people around here will admit." Wyatt turned. Delaney Frost stood a few steps away. She was in her early 30s, about 5'7", with a lean, capable build that suggested someone who didn't sit still for long. Her chestnut hair fell loosely around her shoulders, strands catching the light where the wind had lifted them free from a wool cap she now held in one hand. Her skin carried the faint flush of cold, and her green hazel eyes were sharp, not just observant but actively connecting things as she saw them. She wore an olive canvas jacket over a pale sweater, dark pants, and worn winter boots. Practical. Nothing wasted. "You're Wyatt Calder," she added like she already knew. Wyatt didn't confirm it. "You're the one who talks on the radio," he said instead. Delaney gave a small half-smile. "Community station," she said. "Mostly weather updates and local nonsense." Her gaze dropped to Fen. The dog watched her without moving. "No bark," she noted quietly. Wyatt followed her eyes. "No," he said. Delaney looked back at the tag still in Wyatt's hand. "That's not random," she said. Wyatt waited. "S9, she continued, voice lowering just enough to belong only to them. "Station 9. The words settled between them. Wyatt felt something shift, not surprise, not exactly. Confirmation. "Old rescue station," Delaney went on. "East Slope. Snow response. Shut down 8 years ago after—" She stopped. "After what?" Wyatt asked. Delaney held his gaze for a second longer than comfortable. "After something no one here agrees on," she said finally. That was the closest thing to honesty Wyatt had heard all morning. The sheriff's office was warmer than the store, but the air inside it carried weight. Sheriff Reed Halpern stood behind a desk stacked with paperwork and radio equipment. He was a solid man in his late 40s, broad-shouldered, with salt and pepper hair cut short and a face that looked like it had learned to carry responsibility without complaint. His eyes were a muted gray-brown, steady and careful. He wore a dark sheriff's jacket over his uniform, boots worn but maintained. Everything about him suggested control, not rigid but practiced. "Wyatt," Reed said. "Been a while." Wyatt nodded once. He set the tag on the desk. Reed looked at it. No hesitation this time. No pretending. Just a long, quiet exhale. "You planning on digging into this?" Reed asked. "I was planning on finding where the dog came from," Wyatt said. Reed's eyes flicked toward Fen. The dog stood near Wyatt's leg, still silent, watching. "That might be the same thing," Reed said. Wyatt didn't answer. Reed leaned back slightly. "Listen," he said, voice lowering. "You did a good thing picking him up. Keep him warm. Feed him. Find him a place if you want." A pause. "But leave Station 9 alone." Wyatt's jaw tightened a fraction. "Why?" Reed met his eyes. "Because some things in this town stay buried for a reason." There was no threat in his tone, which made it worse. Wyatt stepped out into the cold again. The sky had brightened, but the town hadn't. Delaney stood near the truck, waiting. "You got the same answer I expected," she said. "Didn't get an answer," Wyatt replied. She nodded. "That's the answer." Before Wyatt could respond, another voice joined them. Smooth, polished, out of place. Always interesting to see people take an interest in local history. Wyatt turned. Seth Hollister approached with measured confidence. He was tall, close to Wyatt's height, but leaner, refined. His charcoal wool coat was clean, expensive without being loud. Beneath it, layers of gray fabric were cut perfectly, tailored to a frame that moved with controlled precision. His hair, dark brown, touched with gray, was combed neatly. His face was long, sharp, and composed, with a polite smile that never quite reached his pale gray eyes. Those eyes assessed everything. "Mr. Calder," Seth said, extending a gloved hand. Wyatt didn't take it. Seth didn't seem offended. "I've heard you've been helping around the ridge," he continued. "People appreciate that." Wyatt didn't respond. Seth's gaze shifted to Fen. The change was subtle, but it was there. Fen stepped back half a pace, not fear, recognition. Then he pressed lightly against Wyatt's leg, still silent. Wyatt felt it. That small movement carried more weight than any bark. Seth noticed too. "A fine animal," he said. "If you're looking to place him, I'd be happy to support the shelter. Supplies, funding, whatever's needed." Delaney's expression hardened slightly. Wyatt kept his eyes on Seth. "I'm not placing him yet," he said. Seth inclined his head. "Of course," he said. "Take your time." His smile held, but something behind it didn't. That afternoon, Delaney drove up to Wyatt's cabin. Her SUV crunched over the frozen ground, engine ticking as it cooled. She stepped out, brushing snow from her jacket, and looked at the cabin like someone measuring distance, not physical, but something harder to define. "You're not letting this go," she said when Wyatt opened the door. "No," Wyatt replied. She nodded. "Then I'll show you where it leads." Fenn was already on his feet. They drove east along the ridge. The road narrowed, snow thickening where fewer vehicles had passed. Pines closed in tighter, branches heavy with ice. The lake disappeared behind the slope, replaced by rising terrain and deeper forest. Delaney didn't speak much. Wyatt didn't ask. Fenn sat between them, upright, eyes forward, then he moved. Not sudden, not panicked, intentional. Fenn leaned forward, muscles tightening, gaze fixed beyond the windshield. "Hey," Wyatt said, steadying him. The dog ignored him. As they reached a fork barely visible beneath the snow, Fenn surged. He pulled hard, stronger than before, dragging against the leash Wyatt had looped loosely around his wrist. "Hold on!" Fenn jumped down as soon as the truck slowed, landing and pulling toward a narrow, almost buried trail leading uphill. He didn't hesitate, didn't search. He followed it, like he knew it. Wyatt exchanged a look with Delaney. Neither spoke. They followed. The station emerged slowly through the trees, Station 9, or what remained of it. The structure had once been solid, timber walls, metal supports, a tall antenna tower now bent and broken like a snapped bone. Fire had touched parts of it, not enough to consume everything, but enough to scar it permanently. Blackened beams cut through the snow. Windows were gone. The place looked less abandoned than left. Wyatt stepped inside. The air was colder there somehow. Fenn moved ahead, slower now, nose low but not sniffing randomly, tracking. Delaney stayed close behind. Wyatt's boots crunched over debris, ash, and hardened snow. Then he saw it. On the floor, partially covered, he crouched, brushing away the gray dust. Letters, written in black, charred. "Don't give the dog to Hollister." The words hit harder than they should have. Not because of what they said, because of how they were written. Desperate. Final. Wyatt stared at them for a long moment, then his eyes dropped. Just beneath the writing, something small. He reached down, a button from a child's coat, blue. The edge cracked slightly, dark stains clung to the fabric thread still attached. Old, dried blood. The cold in the room shifted, not from the air, from understanding beginning to take shape. Wyatt closed his fingers around the button, and for the first time since coming back to this town, he realized this wasn't just about the dog. The cabin felt different the morning after Station 9. Not colder, not quieter, just aware. Wyatt Calder noticed it before he even stood up. Fenn was already awake. The German Shepherd lay near the back door this time, not the front. His body was tucked neatly into itself, but his head was up, ears angled slightly forward, eyes tracking Wyatt the moment he shifted on the couch. The early light cut through the window behind him, outlining the dog's compact, balanced frame, black along the spine, deep golden brown along the chest and legs, fur thickened now that it had dried and settled after the storm. He didn't move when Wyatt sat up, he just watched. Wyatt rubbed a hand across his face, still feeling the weight of the previous day pressing behind his eyes. The words on the floor at Station 9 hadn't faded overnight. Neither had the small button now sitting on the kitchen table. "All right," Wyatt muttered under his breath. "Let's see what you are." Fen blinked once. Wyatt didn't rush. He moved through the morning the way he approached anything unfamiliar, with patience and quiet testing. He filled 2 bowls, one for water, one for food. Fen approached when the bowls were set down. He didn't rush, didn't push, didn't circle or pace. He stopped a short distance away, looked at Wyatt, then lowered his head and began eating in measured, controlled movements. No guarding, no snapping, but no distraction either. Wyatt leaned against the counter, arms folded. "Not starving enough to forget discipline," he said. Fen finished, stepped back and sat, again facing the door. Wyatt watched him for a long second, then he did something he hadn't done in years. He gave a command. "Stay." The word came out low, steady, automatic. Fen's ears twitched. His body didn't move. Wyatt exhaled slowly. He stepped forward, then to the side. Fen tracked him with his eyes, but held position. Wyatt gave another. "Down." Fen hesitated, just a fraction too long, then lowered himself. Not clean, not perfect, but close. Wyatt's jaw tightened slightly. "Someone started with you," he said quietly. He tried one more, a small hand signal, 2 fingers angled downward. Fen stared at his hand, then tilted his head. No response. Wyatt dropped his hand. "Not finished," he muttered. That settled something inside him. Fen wasn't a trained K9, but he wasn't untrained either. He existed somewhere in between, and that was harder to explain. It happened later that morning. Wyatt stepped outside to check the metal storage shed behind the cabin. The wind had picked up again, not strong enough for another storm, but sharp enough to move loose panels and test anything not properly secured. The shed door slammed, hard. The sound cracked through the quiet like a gunshot. Fen reacted instantly. But not the way Wyatt expected. The dog didn't run toward the noise. He recoiled. His body dropped low, muscles tightening inward instead of outward. He backed quickly toward the cabin wall, ears flattening, breathing shifting sharp and shallow. For the first time since Wyatt had found him, there was something close to panic in his movement. Real panic. Wyatt stepped toward him slowly. "Easy," he said. Fen didn't growl, didn't bark, but he didn't come forward either. He stayed pressed near the wall, eyes locked on the shed, as if the sound had triggered something deeper than surprise. Wyatt crouched. "Hey," he said, softer now. After a moment, Fen moved. Not fully, not relaxed, but enough to step closer. Wyatt rested a hand against his shoulder. The tension didn't disappear, but it eased. Wyatt looked toward the shed, then back at the dog. "Close spaces," he said quietly, or something like it. He didn't need more. That reaction told him enough. Fen had been confined before, not just held, controlled. By midday, Wyatt was in town again, not to ask questions this time, to listen. The radio repair shop sat at the edge of Main Street, tucked between a hardware store and an empty office space with dark windows. The sign above the door read Vane Communications, the lettering faded but still legible. Inside, the air smelled faintly of solder, dust, and old electronics. Elias Vane stood behind a cluttered workbench. He was thin, almost wiry despite his age, with a posture that leaned slightly forward as if he had spent decades bending over delicate equipment. His gray hair was uneven, cut short without much care. His face was lined deeply but not weak, just worn. His eyes, pale blue-gray, carried a restless sharpness that didn't match his otherwise quiet presence. He wore a faded flannel shirt under a gray cardigan, sleeves pushed back just enough to keep them out of his work. Elias looked up when Wyatt entered. Then his gaze dropped to Fen, and stayed there. "You're not from around here," Elias said. "I am," Wyatt replied. "Just don't talk much." Elias gave a faint nod. "That helps." Wyatt stepped forward and set the metal tag on the workbench. Elias didn't touch it, but his face changed. Not dramatically, just enough. "You've seen this," Wyatt said. Elias shook his head. "No." Too fast. Wyatt didn't push. "Radio still working?" he asked instead. Elias blinked once, then nodded slowly. "Most things still work," he said. "People are what break." Wyatt held his gaze for a moment longer, then picked up the tag. As he turned to leave, Elias spoke again. "You found that dog near the ridge?" Wyatt paused. "Yes." Elias looked down at his hands, then away. "That's not where it started," he said quietly. Wyatt waited. Elias didn't continue. It happened that night. No warning. No sound. Wyatt was seated at the table, the small button still resting near his hand, when Fenn stood up abruptly and moved toward the back of the cabin. Not the door, the floor. He began scratching. Not frantically, not playfully, deliberately, same spot, again. Wyatt frowned. "Fenn," he said. The dog didn't stop. The sound of claws against wood echoed in the quiet room, steady and insistent, like a signal that refused to be ignored. Wyatt stood, crossed the room, and crouched beside him. "What is it?" Fenn stepped back half a pace, waiting. Wyatt ran his hand over the boards. One of them shifted, barely. His fingers tightened. Wyatt pried the board loose beneath it. A wrapped bundle, oilcloth, recently placed, not frozen into the wood, not old. Wyatt pulled it free. Fenn sat beside him, still watching. Wyatt unwrapped the cloth slowly. Inside, a handheld radio, old but intact, and something else. Paper, folded tight. Wyatt opened it. The handwriting was uneven but legible, the letters pressed hard into the page as if written under pressure. "If Fenn comes back alone, it means they found me. Don't trust anyone who says they want to put things back the way they were. SK." Wyatt stared at the note. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. "This wasn't here long," he said quietly. Fenn's ears twitched, as if he understood. Delaney arrived less than an hour later. She stepped inside, breath visible in the cold air she carried with her, eyes immediately drawn to the radio and the unfolded note on the table. "You found something," she said. Wyatt handed it to her. She read it once, then again. Her expression shifted. Not shock, not exactly. Recognition. "SK," she murmured. "You know it?" Wyatt asked. Delaney nodded slowly. "Sadie Kincaid." Wyatt waited. "She's 16, Delaney continued. "Lived on the north side with her aunt. Quiet kid, smart. Didn't talk much unless she had to." A pause. "Reported missing early winter." Wyatt's eyes narrowed. "Missing how?" Delaney exhaled. "They said she ran away." Wyatt looked at the note again. The pressure in the handwriting, the phrasing, "if Fenn comes back alone." "That doesn't read like someone leaving," he said. "No," Delaney agreed. "It doesn't." They drove to the edge of town, not speaking much. The night had settled cold and still again, the sky clear enough for stars to show through. Elias Vane's shop was still lit. Wyatt knocked once before pushing the door open. Elias looked up, saw the note in Wyatt's hand, and went very still. "You know her," Wyatt said. Elias didn't answer. Wyatt stepped closer. "Sadie Kincaid," he continued. 16. Missing. Elias's jaw tightened. Delaney watched from the doorway. "People say she left," Wyatt added. Elias let out a slow breath, then sat down. Not from weakness, from weight. "She didn't leave," he said. The words came quiet, certain. Wyatt waited. Elias looked at Fenn. The dog held his gaze. For a long moment neither moved. Then Elias spoke again. "She's hiding." Elias Vane did not look like a man who trusted his own voice anymore. He stood in the doorway of his repair shop with the old map unfolded between his hands. The paper yellowed at the creases and softened by years of being opened only when memory alone no longer felt safe enough. Under the single bulb above his workbench, his age showed harder than it had the night before. His shoulders, narrow and bent from decades over radios and wiring tables, seemed to carry more than wear. They carried surrender. His pale blue-gray eyes kept drifting to the door, then to Fen, then back to Wyatt, as if he were trying to decide which of them was the greater risk. "She won't stay in one place longer than she has to," Elias said at last. "Not if she thinks they're close." Wyatt took the map but didn't fold it yet. "They?" Elias's jaw tightened. "The men doing the looking," he said. "That's enough for now." Delaney Frost leaned against the edge of the workbench, arms folded inside her olive canvas jacket. Her chestnut hair had come half loose from its tie, and the cold had left a rose-colored flush across her cheeks. Her sharp green-hazel eyes stayed on Elias with the calm pressure of someone who knew that silence often meant guilt as much as fear. "You've been helping her," Delaney said. It wasn't phrased as a question. Elias did not deny it. He only rubbed one thumb slowly across the worn edge of the map. "Food when I could. Batteries. A blanket once." He swallowed. "Things a girl can carry without leaving too much behind." Wyatt studied him. "Why not take her to the sheriff?" At that, something like bitterness moved through Elias's face. "Because once a thing is handed to the town, it stops belonging to the person who lived it." He looked away. "And because I don't know who still answers to conscience and who answers to old arrangements." Fen stood near Wyatt's leg, still and attentive, at the sound of Elias's voice changing, becoming thinner, more exposed. The German shepherd's ears shifted forward. He watched the old man with that same measuring patience he gave everyone, as if he could smell regret the way he smelled cold metal or snow. Elias stepped toward a shelf, collected a flashlight, 2 spare batteries, and a wrapped parcel of jerky and crackers. "If you find her," he said quietly, "don't bring her straight into town. Don't go to the sheriff's office first. Don't go near the lake road. And if she tells you to leave, don't mistake it for ingratitude. The girl's been alone too long." Then he touched a point on the map with one trembling finger. "A forestry watchtower," he said, "up above the old east line. Most people forgot it after the storm damage. She won't use the lower path now, too open." Wyatt folded the map. "Why are you telling me this?" Elias met his eyes. "Because the dog came back to you," he said, "and sometimes that means the wrong story has lasted as long as it's going to." The climb began before dawn. The old forestry route was barely a road anymore, just a narrow track threading through pine and birch, swallowed in places by drifts and fallen limbs. Wyatt drove as far as he could in the pickup, then left it behind at a break in the ridge where the tires would be hidden from the main trail. From there they went on foot. The morning light came slow and colorless through the trees. Snow hung from branches in thick, quiet shelves. Every breath burned. Every step broke the stillness and then was swallowed by it. Delaney moved well for someone who didn't live in the woods, steady and practical in her dark pants and winter boots. One gloved hand gripping the strap of the pack Elias had given them. She did not complain. She did not waste words. Wyatt noticed that about her more with each passing hour. She was not brave in the loud way some people were. She was brave by remaining useful. Fen ranged ahead, though never far enough to lose sight. He did not pull blindly or rush. Instead, he paused often, testing the air, checking the slope, glancing back at Wyatt as if confirming the pack was still together. Snow had gathered along the black saddle of his back and dusted the gold fur of his legs, but he moved with growing certainty. Not toward some ancient instinct, toward routes he had traveled recently with someone who trusted him enough to let him lead and follow both. Wyatt thought about that as they climbed, For years he had believed silence belonged mostly to men like him, to soldiers, widowers, fathers who failed their sons, and sons who outlived explanations. But there were other kinds of silence too. The silence of teenage girls who learned too early that being believed was a luxury. The silence of old men who had kept one secret too long. The silence of dogs that had stopped expecting mercy from noise. By late morning, the trees thinned. The watchtower stood another 200 yards ahead, perched on a slope above the frozen spread of Red Pine Inlet. Once it had probably served fire crews or search teams. Now it looked like the skeleton of a memory, weather-lean, half-abandoned, one side patched with newer boards that didn't belong to the original structure. Wyatt stopped before the clearing and raised a hand. Delaney froze beside him. Fenn had already gone still, not alarmed, intent. Wyatt scanned the slope. No movement, no smoke. But there, faint in the snow, were prints. Small boot tracks, partly drifted over, then doubled back near the steps. Someone cautious, someone surviving. He approached slowly. The tower door was shut from inside. Wyatt stopped 3 feet away. "Sadie," he said, keeping his voice low and clear. "My name's Wyatt Calder. Elias sent us." No answer. Delaney stepped beside him. "I'm Delaney Frost," she added. "From the station in town. We brought food, batteries." Nothing. Then Fenn moved. He stepped out from Wyatt's leg and approached the door without haste, tail low, posture soft. He made no sound until he reached the wood. Then very quietly he gave a single broken whine. Not a plea, not fear, but something closer to recognition offered carefully. The lock shifted. The door opened 3 inches. A girl looked out. Sadie Kincaid was 16, but nothing in her expression belonged to ease or youth. She was small and slim under a navy parka gone dull at the seams. Her dark brown hair tied back badly as if she'd cut it herself once with dull scissors and then stopped caring. The cold had taken color from her face, except where the wind had burned the skin raw at the nose and cheekbones. Her eyes were dark hazel, watchful, too old in the way frightened young people sometimes became when adults failed them more than once. For half a second she looked only at Wyatt. Then Fenn stepped forward again. Sadie's whole face changed, not into relief exactly. Relief was too easy a word. It changed into proof. She dropped to one knee. Fenn crossed the threshold and pressed his head against her gloved hand. With a low sound buried deep in his chest, Sadie bowed over him, eyes shut. Her shoulders shook once, hard, then went still again. "You came back," she whispered. Fenn did not jump or paw or bark. He only stayed there, leaning his weight into her as if to confirm that whatever else had been taken from her, this was still hers. Wyatt looked away for a moment. Some reunions deserved privacy even in the open. Sadie rose and stepped aside. "Inside," she said. "Quick." The watchtower smelled of damp wool, dust, and canned soup. A cot had been rigged in one corner. A camp stove sat near the wall. 2 crates held scavenged supplies, protein bars, batteries, water jugs, a first aid kit with almost nothing left in it. Not enough to live comfortably. Enough to stay hidden. Sadie took the food Delaney offered but kept her distance after that, one hand resting unconsciously on Fenn's collar as if she still needed to confirm he was real. Wyatt crouched near the stove, keeping his posture open and unthreatening. "How long?" he asked. Sadie's jaw tightened. "Long enough." Delaney glanced toward the frost-clouded windows. "Elias said you found something." Sadie didn't answer immediately. She studied Delaney first, then Wyatt, then the door, as though trust for her had become a series of exits. "Near Station 9, she said at last. "There's an old storage building downslope from the main structure. I used to sort donated supplies there sometimes. Blankets, emergency kits, that kind of thing." Her fingers moved once through Fenn's fur. "One day I found boxes that weren't supposed to be there. Engineering logs, land records, Old maintenance schedules, they'd been shoved into the back behind broken shelves like someone meant to burn them later and never got around to it. Wyatt said nothing. Sadie looked at him as if measuring whether he could bear the next part. They were using repairs as a cover, she said. Route repairs, equipment upgrades, emergency access work. But the numbers didn't match what got built. Some materials were never installed. Some land changed hands right after the station shut down. Parcels around the east side, lake access, service roads, storage rights. Hollister, Delaney said quietly. Sadie nodded once. The name showed up a lot, not always signed, but always near the transfers. Wyatt felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the room. And Marlin Pike? At the name, Sadie's face lost what little softness Fenn's return had given it. Marlin found where I'd been staying the first time, she said. Not by tracking me, by tracking him. Her hand tightened on Fenn's collar. He took Fenn while I was down the slope getting fuel tabs from the place Elias leaves them. When I came back, the shelter was torn open, tracks everywhere. Then the storm hit. She swallowed. I thought they'd killed him, or left him somewhere he wouldn't get back from. Fenn lifted his head and looked at her. Sadie let out a breath that sounded like it had been trapped in her chest for days. That's why he knew the roads, Wyatt said. You moved him with you. Sadie nodded. 3 places in the last month. Delaney stepped nearer, voice gentler now. Sadie, you need to come in. We can't leave you up here. No, Sadie said at once. It's not safe. It's less safe down there. There was no drama in her answer. That made it land harder. A sound came then, small, almost lost under the wind, not from outside, from inside the tower. Fenn had crossed to the far wall and stopped beneath a faded line of pencil marks. Sadie noticed him and went still. Wyatt followed his gaze. Height marks, dates, scratched into the wood over years. Most were old, half-sanded by time. Search volunteers, maybe, rangers. But one set was recent, darker, written in a hurried hand. S.K. December 3rd, S.K. December 19th, S.K. January 6th. And below the last one, barely visible unless you knelt to the right angle in the light, were 2 words still here. Delaney said nothing. Wyatt didn't either. The sight of those marks, one girl alone, measuring her own existence against a wall because no one else would witness it, hit the room with a force no accusation could have matched. Sadie looked away first and done. I needed to know the days were still happening, she said. Fenn returned to her side and sat down. For one long second, even the wind seemed to back off. Wyatt spoke more carefully after that. What else did you find? Sadie hesitated, then walked to her pack and pulled out a weatherproof folder wrapped twice in plastic. She didn't hand it over. She only held it in both hands like something that had become heavier than paper. There are maintenance logs from the winter the station closed, she said. Route closures, delayed response times, orders that don't match public reports. Wyatt felt his pulse shift. Delaney saw it too. Her eyes moved to him. There's a name in there, Sadie said, voice thinning. I didn't know what it meant at first. I just knew Elias went pale when he saw it. Wyatt held her gaze. Whose name? Sadie opened her mouth, then stopped. From outside, faint but unmistakable, came the distant whine of an engine moving over packed snow. All 3 of them turned toward the window. Not a truck. Lighter. Faster. A snowmobile. Then another. Sadie's face drained. They're early, she whispered. Wyatt was already moving, crossing to the lamp hung by the window. He shut it off. The room dimmed at once, lit only by the gray wash of snow-reflected daylight. Delaney stepped to the stairs leading up to the observation platform and peered through a crack in the boards. How many? Sadie had gone rigid. Maybe 2, maybe 3. Can they see us from the lower line? Wyatt asked. If they sweep wide enough. Fenn had not barked. He stood at the center of the room now, body angled toward the door, every muscle set. Wyatt crossed back to Sadie. Listen to me, he said. If we move on my count. You stay between me and Delaney. Fenn stays with you. Sadie looked at him, terrified and furious in equal measure. You still don't know who to trust. No, Wyatt said, but I know who I'm not leaving behind. Something in her face changed then. Not trust, not fully, but a crack in the wall where it might one day begin. Outside, the engine noise grew louder, then cut abruptly. Silence, the worst kind. Sadie's grip tightened on the folder. Wyatt kept his voice low. The name. Now. She looked down at the plastic-wrapped papers in her hands, then back up at him. Her lips parted. For a heartbeat, the room held only breath and fear and the dry creak of old timber under cold. Then she said it. The name in the file. A board snapped somewhere below the tower. Fenn turned sharply toward the sound. Sadie flinched, then forced the words out in a whisper that seemed to come from much farther away than her throat. Is your father's? The forest felt too quiet after they moved Sadie. Not the natural quiet of winter, the kind that came when something had been disturbed and hadn't settled yet. Wyatt Calder didn't speak during the drive back. Delaney sat beside him, watching the road, her hands wrapped tight around the straps of her bag. The tension between them had shifted into something heavier. Not disagreement yet, but pressure building toward it. Fenn lay in the back seat. For once, he wasn't watching the road. He was watching Wyatt. They left Sadie in a place even fewer people remembered. An abandoned ranger outpost half buried behind a collapsed ridge, its entrance shielded by fallen timber and snowdrift. Elias had marked it faintly on the map, but even then it took time to recognize the shape beneath the trees. Sadie had resisted at first, insisting movement only increased risk, but Wyatt had made the call. Here, you're harder to find, he told her. Sadie had studied him, weighing not just his words but the weight behind them. Then she nodded once. Fenn had stayed close to her until the last moment, not clinging, not desperate, but aware. When Wyatt called him back, Fenn hesitated. That hesitation stayed with Wyatt long after they drove away. By the time they reached the cabin, the sky had already begun fading into late afternoon blue. Wyatt stepped inside and stopped. Everything looked the same. Firewood stacked near the wall, the old couch, the table where the metal tag still rested beside the folded map. But something inside him had shifted. Not just the situation. Him. He set his jacket down slower than usual, as if unsure what to do with his hands. Delaney closed the door behind them. You didn't say anything, she said. Wyatt didn't turn. What would you like me to say? That your father's name showing up in that file doesn't change what we do next. Wyatt let out a quiet breath. That's easy to say when it's not your father. The words landed harder than he intended. Delaney didn't respond immediately. When she did, her voice had softened, but not retreated. Truth doesn't wait for comfort, Wyatt. He turned then, and it doesn't always leave anything standing after it arrives. They held each other's gaze. The first crack. Later that evening, Delaney left for town. Not to walk away, to work. Wyatt knew that. Still didn't make it easier. Fenn remained, for a while. The library sat at the edge of Red Pine Inlet, a modest structure with tall, narrow windows that held on to the last light longer than the rest of the town. Inside, the air smelled of paper, dust, and the slow passing of years. Nora Bell stood behind the front desk. She was in her late 50s, her frame slight but upright, her movements precise without ever feeling rigid. Her silver-streaked brown hair was pulled into a low bun, and she wore a thick beige cardigan over a simple blouse. Sleeves rolled just enough to keep them from interfering with her work. Her eyes, Soft gray, thoughtful, carried the patience of someone who had spent a lifetime organizing fragments of other people's stories. Delaney placed the folder on the desk. Nora looked at it, then at Delaney. "This is not something that belongs on the public shelf," Nora said quietly. "No," Delaney replied. "That's why I brought it to you." Nora hesitated, then nodded once. They worked in silence for nearly an hour. Old maps, maintenance logs, archived permits, fragments. Nothing whole, that was the pattern. "Someone removed key documents," Nora murmured, tracing a gap in a sequence of records. "Not all of them, just enough to break continuity." Delaney leaned closer. "Can you reconstruct it?" Nora adjusted her glasses slightly. "Not completely," she said, "but enough to see where the story bends." She pulled a thin file from a lower drawer. "This is from the winter Station 9 shut down," she said. Delaney flipped it open. Names, dates, equipment transfers, then a signature. She froze. Nora already knew. "Yes," she said quietly. "That's Wyatt's father." Back at the cabin, Wyatt sat alone. The fire crackled softly, casting uneven light across the walls. Fen lay near the door, always the door. Wyatt stared at the metal tag in his hand, S9 to 17. He turned it over again, then again, as if it might say something new. It didn't, but his memory did. His father's hands, large, steady, always careful with tools, a man who fixed things, who taught him how to listen to machines, to weather, to silence. A man who died in a winter accident. That's what the town had said. That's what Wyatt had believed until now. Elias arrived just after dark. He didn't knock, just stepped inside like someone who had decided hesitation no longer mattered. Wyatt looked up. Elias looked older than he had that morning. "I heard you found her," Elias said. "We did." Elias nodded. Then he stepped closer to the fire. "There's something I should have told you before." Wyatt didn't move. Elias swallowed once. "The night your father died," he said, "I was on radio watch." Wyatt's fingers tightened around the tag. Elias continued. "There was a transmission. Not official, not logged." His voice lowered. "Your father's voice." Wyatt's chest tightened. "What did he say?" Elias shook his head slowly. "Not much. That's the problem." A pause. He sounded uncertain, like he was trying to decide something. Wyatt felt something fracture inside that didn't make a sound. "Then the signal cut," Elias added, "and the next report said equipment failure. Avalanche conditions, end of story." "And you never said anything." Elias met his eyes. "Because in towns like this," he said quietly, "truth doesn't always survive long enough to matter." A faint sound broke the silence. Not from inside, from outside. Fen was already on his feet. He didn't bark, didn't growl. He moved toward the door, slow and focused. Wyatt stood. "What is it?" Fen stopped just short of the threshold, his nose lifted slightly, scenting. Then he turned his head toward the lake. His body went still. Not fear, recognition. Wyatt felt it before he understood it. "That smell again," he murmured. Fen stepped closer to the door, waiting. Reed Halpern arrived minutes later, not in a rush, not hiding. He stepped inside, removed his gloves, and closed the door behind him with deliberate care. "You're moving faster than I hoped," Reed said. Wyatt didn't answer. Reed's eyes moved from Wyatt to Elias, then briefly to Fen. "You found the girl," he said. "Alive." Reed nodded once. "That's good." It sounded like he meant it. Wyatt stepped forward. "You knew about Station 9. Reed didn't deny it. "I knew enough," he said. "Enough to warn me away." "Yes. Why?" Reed held his gaze. "Because once you pull something like this apart," he said, "it doesn't stop where you think it will." Wyatt's voice hardened. "It already didn't." Reed exhaled slowly. I'm not here to threaten you, he said. I'm here to tell you the truth from my side. Wyatt waited. Reed continued. If you keep digging, you're not just exposing one man, you're exposing decisions made by people who are still part of this town. A pause. People with families, with histories tied to this place. That's not a reason to bury it, Delaney said sharply from the doorway. She had returned without anyone noticing. Reed turned to her. It is when the alternative is tearing the entire community apart without proof strong enough to hold anyone accountable. Silence. Heavy. Real. Wyatt looked between them. Delaney's certainty. Reed's caution. Both made sense. That was the problem. The argument came fast after that. Delaney pushed forward. We have enough to start asking questions publicly, she said. Records, testimony. Not enough, Wyatt cut in. She stared at him. Not enough for what? For this, he said, gesturing toward everything. For blowing it open without knowing exactly what we're dealing with. Delaney's voice sharpened. That's not you talking. That's fear. Wyatt didn't deny it. Maybe it is. The room went still. Elias looked away. Reed said nothing. Delaney's eyes softened, but only slightly. You don't get to step back now, she said quietly. Wyatt looked at her. I might have to. The fire had burned low by the time the room finally emptied. Reed left first, then Elias. Delaney stayed a moment longer. Then she turned and walked out without another word. Wyatt stood alone. For a long time. It was Fenn who broke it. Or rather, his absence. Wyatt noticed it not because of noise, but because there wasn't any. The door still closed, but the dog, gone. Wyatt's pulse shifted instantly. Fenn! Nothing. He moved to the door, opened it. Cold air rushed in. Tracks, fresh, leading away from the cabin, not random, directed. Wyatt grabbed his coat and followed. The trail led downhill, toward the lake. Snow compressed under boots and paws. Fenn's tracks were clear. Alongside them, another set, larger, heavier, not walking. Dragging slightly in places. Wyatt's jaw tightened. Marlin, he muttered. The tracks reached the edge of the frozen lake there. He stopped. The surface was scarred by recent movement, tire marks wide, fresh, a truck. Wyatt scanned the area, then saw it, a strip of orange fabric caught in the rough edge of the ice. He crouched, picked it up. Fenn's collar, cut, not torn, cut. Wyatt's hand tightened. Then his eyes shifted, just beyond the tire tracks, something half embedded in the thin ice near the shoreline. Metal. He stepped carefully, knelt, pulled it free, a key, cold, heavy, stamped Harbor 3. Wyatt stared at it and understood this wasn't over, not even close. The key felt heavier than it should have. Wyatt Calder turned it once more in his hand, as the early light stretched across the cabin floor. The metal was worn smooth along the edges, not from time alone, but from use, from being handled often, deliberately. The stamped words Harbor 3 caught the light in dull grooves. Delaney stood near the table, arms crossed, watching him. You know where that is? She said. Wyatt nodded once. Old supply dock, he replied. East edge of the inlet, used during winter runs when Station 9 was still active. Delaney exhaled slowly. Which means whatever's left out there, she began. Wasn't meant to be found, Wyatt finished. They held each other's gaze. No argument this time, only urgency. Nora Bell confirmed it an hour later. The library was colder that morning, the heating system struggling against the lingering winter. Nora stood at a side table with a large unfolded map, her fingers resting carefully along faded blue lines marking water access routes. Harbor 3 was never a public dock, she explained. It was designated for emergency supply runs, medical, equipment, personnel during storm closures. She glanced up. After Station 9 shut down, it should have been decommissioned. Should have, Delaney repeated. Nora gave a quiet nod. But the land didn't remain neutral. She continued. It was reassigned, quietly, into a development zone. Delaney leaned forward. Whose? Nora didn't hesitate this time. A private land group funded through Hollister's investment network. The room fell silent. Wyatt looked down at the key again, then closed his fist around it. I'm going, he said. Delaney straightened. We should wait for Reed. Wyatt shook his head. If Fenn's there, we don't have time. Delaney studied him, then reached into her coat pocket, pulling out her phone. I'm not asking you to wait, she said quietly, but I'm not going in blind either. She typed quickly, sent 2 messages, Elias, Reed, then she looked up. Let's move. The dock sat hidden beneath a low ridge of pine and rock, where the frozen inlet curved inward like a broken tooth in the shoreline. The path down was narrow and half-covered, used just enough to exist, not enough to be remembered. Wyatt parked the truck out of sight. From there, they went on foot. The air carried a different scent near the water. Metal, oil, something old that had never quite left. Wyatt raised a hand. They stopped. From below a sound, faint, scratching. Wyatt's chest tightened instantly. Fenn, he said under his breath. They moved carefully along the edge of the structure. The building itself was low and wide, built from heavy timber reinforced with rusting steel plates. One side opened toward the dock, a series of warped planks leading out over the frozen water. Another side was sealed, windows boarded from the inside. Wyatt crouched near a gap in the wall. Looked in. 3 men. Marlon Pike stood closest. He was exactly as Sadie had described, broad, heavy, built like someone who had spent a lifetime moving things that didn't want to be moved. His brown canvas jacket hung open over a thick sweater, sleeves rolled just enough to reveal forearms marked with old scars and grease stains. His hair was short, uneven, graying at the edges, and his face carried that same permanent half-scowl of men who had long ago stopped pretending to care how they were seen. 2 others moved behind him, hired. You could tell by the way they stood, alert but not invested. Check under the boards again, Marlon said, voice rough. We already did, one of them replied. Then check better. Wyatt's eyes moved. There a section of floor partially lifted. Beneath it, darkness and the sound again, scratching. Weak now, but still there. Fenn. Wyatt's hand tightened against the ground. Delaney leaned closer. He's under there, she whispered. Wyatt nodded. We go quiet, he said. Get him out first. They slipped inside through the rear wall, silent, measured. Wyatt moved ahead, every step placed with the precision of muscle memory that had never left him. Delaney followed, slower but steady. The scratching stopped. Wyatt froze. For a split second, everything went still. Then, a low sound. Not from above, from below. A single quiet whine. Recognition. Not fear. Fenn knew he was there, even through wood, even through silence. Wyatt exhaled once, and moved. The floor panel came loose with a controlled lift beneath it, a narrow maintenance crawl space. And inside Fenn. The dog lay curled tight, body stiff, breath shallow. His eyes opened the moment light reached him. He didn't bark, didn't move wildly. He just looked at Wyatt and waited. Wyatt reached down. Easy, he murmured. Fenn let himself be lifted. The moment his paws touched the ground, he leaned briefly against Wyatt's leg, just enough to confirm something that didn't need words. Then he turned, toward the far side of the building, nose low, tracking. Wyatt followed his gaze. Not just him, he said quietly. The hidden compartment wasn't large, but it was deep enough. Wyatt found it beneath a second set of boards farther in. A metal hatch. Old. Locked. He used the key, Harbor 3. It turned. The hatch opened inside, a narrow stair leading down. The air below was colder, still, a preserved space. Delaney's breath caught slightly as she stepped in behind him. "This hasn't been touched," she whispered. Wyatt shook his head. "No," he said. "It's been hidden." Shelves lined the walls, metal boxes, labeled, catalogued, too organized to be forgotten. Wyatt opened one. Inside documents, maintenance logs, route closures, dates that didn't align with official records. Another box, audio equipment, old but intact. He pressed play, static, then a voice. "Hold the line, do not deploy," Wyatt froze. The voice was calm, controlled, authority without hesitation. Delaney looked at him. "You know that voice?" she asked. Wyatt didn't answer. He moved to the next box. Land records, transfers, approvals signed weeks before the station officially shut down. A pattern, clear now. This wasn't one man. This was a system, above them. A sound. Boots. "Someone's here," one of the hired men called. Marlin's voice followed. "Check it." Wyatt shut the box. "Time to move," he said. They came up fast, too fast to stay hidden. Marlin saw them first. His expression didn't change, but his stance did. "Thought I smelled trouble," he said. Wyatt stepped forward. "You took the dog," he said. Marlin shrugged slightly. "Dog follows scent," he replied. "Problem solves itself." Fenn stood beside Wyatt now, not growling, but ready. Delaney moved to the side, creating space. Marlin's men shifted, weapons half raised. "Step away," one said. Wyatt didn't. The chase broke fast. Marlin moved first toward the dock. Wyatt followed, boots hitting wood. The boards groaned under weight, old, weak. The frozen water beneath them cracked faintly with each step. Delaney shouted something behind him. Didn't matter. Wyatt closed the distance. Marlin turned, slipped. The board beneath him split. Half his body dropped through. Ice water below, dark, deadly. For a second, everything stopped. Wyatt reached, grabbed him, pulled, not thinking, not choosing, just acting. Marlin coughed hard, dragging himself back onto the dock. "You should have let me drop," he spat. Wyatt didn't answer. He just stepped back. "Drop it." The voice cut through everything. Reed Halpern stood at the edge of the dock, gun raised, steady, not at Wyatt, at Marlin. "Hands where I can see them," Reed said. Marlin hesitated, then slowly raised his hands. The two hired men followed. Delaney stepped forward, breathing hard, alive. Fenn stood beside Wyatt, still, watching. Reed moved closer, eyes scanning everything. The broken dock, the open hatch, the documents. Then Wyatt. "You found it," he said quietly. Wyatt nodded. Reed exhaled, like something heavy had finally settled. Later. Back inside the building, Reed listened to the recording. The old voice filled the room again. "Hold the line. Do not deploy." Reed's hand tightened slightly on the radio. Wyatt watched him. "You recognize it," Wyatt said. Reed didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was quieter than before. "Yes," he said. A pause. Then, "That's my father." The banners went up anyway. Red Pine Inlet did not cancel things easily. The winter festival had been planned for weeks. Lights strung between poles, wooden stalls built along the lakefront, music equipment wired through the community stage near the old town square. Snow still covered most of the ground, but the sky had cleared into a pale, bright blue that made everything look cleaner than it was. Wyatt Calder stood at the edge of the crowd. He did not belong to gatherings like this. Not before, not even now, but he stayed. Fenn sat beside him. Not at the door this time, not watching exits, just sitting, still. Seth Hollister stood on the stage. He looked exactly as he always did, composed, controlled, his charcoal coat perfectly fitted, his expression calm enough to pass for confidence, but careful enough to avoid arrogance. His hair was neat despite the cold wind, and his pale gray eyes moved across the crowd like someone reading a room he already believed he understood. "This town," Seth said into the microphone, his voice carrying smoothly across the square, and has always been built on resilience, on adaptation, on moving forward even when the past becomes complicated. A few people nodded, others didn't. Delaney Frost stood behind the temporary broadcast station. Her setup was simple: portable mixers, a laptop, cables running into the event's speaker system, but her presence changed the weight of the air. She wasn't dressed for show, just her olive jacket, dark pants, boots still marked with snow and dust. Her chestnut hair was tied back tighter today, her face set in quiet focus. She wasn't there to argue. She was there to reveal. Reed Halpern stood near the front, uniformed, still sheriff, but different. The way he held himself had shifted, less guarded, more resolved. His salt and pepper hair caught the light, and his face, lined from years of decisions, no longer carried hesitation. Only acceptance of what those decisions had led to. Behind him, 2 county officers waited. Not from Red Pine. That mattered. Delaney didn't interrupt Seth immediately. She waited. Let him speak, let the narrative build, let the town settle into the version of events it had always been told. Then, she reached forward, flipped a switch, the microphone in Seth's hand cut out. A small ripple moved through the crowd, confusion first, then attention. Delaney stepped forward. "This town deserves the full story," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. She didn't accuse, not directly. She started with records, land transfers, dates, numbers that didn't match construction logs. Nora Bell stepped forward next, holding a folder. Her voice was softer but steady. "These documents were altered," she said. "Sections removed, signatures changed, timelines adjusted." Murmurs spread. Then Sadie Kincaid walked onto the stage. She looked smaller than everyone remembered. 16, thin. Her navy parka hung loose around her shoulders, her dark hair tied back unevenly, her face still marked faintly by cold and exhaustion. But her eyes held, steady. She didn't look at Seth. She looked at the town. "I didn't run away," she said. The words landed harder than anything before. Seth did not move, not yet. He stood at the edge of the stage, watching, calculating, waiting. Then the recording played. The old audio crackled through the speakers, static, wind, and then the voice. "Hold the line, do not deploy." The entire square went still, not because of what was said, because of who recognized it. Reed Halpern lowered his head, just slightly, but enough. Wyatt felt it, that shift, that moment when truth stopped being distant and became personal. Reed stepped forward. He didn't take the stage. He didn't need to. "This case is being reopened," he said. "All materials will be turned over to county and state investigators." His voice carried weight, not authority alone. Responsibility. "I won't pretend I didn't know parts of this," he added. "But I will say this now. Continuing to stay silent would make me part of it." The words didn't divide the crowd. They exposed it. Some faces tightened, others softened. The line had always been there. Now it was visible. Seth finally moved. He stepped forward again, voice returning. Not raised, not defensive, measured. "What you're hearing," he said, "are fragments, misunderstood, taken out of context." His eyes moved across the people. "This town depends on stability, on investment, on trust. If you tear this apart without full understanding, you risk more than reputation." He didn't deny. He reframed. Wyatt saw it clearly. That was Seth's strength. Then Elias Vane stepped forward, slow, unsteady but certain. The old man didn't belong on a stage, but he stood there anyway. "I heard it," Elias said. His voice shook once, then steadied. "I heard that transmission 8 years ago. I didn't report it. I didn't question it." He swallowed. I told myself it wasn't my place. Silence. I've lived with that, he added. Every day since. The crowd shifted, not in anger, in recognition. Delaney didn't press. She didn't need to. The pieces were already there. She had simply placed them in the light. Fenn remained beside Wyatt through all of it. He didn't bark, didn't react to the noise, the movement, the tension. He sat calm, present, and somehow that stillness anchored everything. Wyatt felt it. Others did too, a quiet center in the middle of unraveling. The officers moved in, not dramatically, no struggle. Seth didn't resist. He allowed them to take his arm, his expression unchanged, controlled, until the very end. Only then a flicker, not fear, something closer to realization. The system around him had shifted, and systems mattered more than individuals. After nothing felt immediate, no celebration, no resolution, just movement, slow, necessary. The truth didn't fix everything, it rearranged it. Days passed. Then weeks. Wyatt sat at the table in the cabin again. The same place, different weight. The file lay open in front of him. His father's name. Clear. Present. But not what he had feared. Not corruption. Not betrayal. Something harder. Resistance. Opposition. A refusal to follow an order. The order. Hold the line. Delay response. Wyatt's father had pushed back and been removed, cut out of the chain, left with a choice, stay or act alone. He had chosen to act and died doing it. Wyatt closed the file slowly, not relief, not entirely, but something close, understanding. His father had not been perfect, but he had not been what Wyatt feared. That mattered. Red Pine Inlet changed, not all at once, but steadily. The idea of reopening Station 9 came first as a suggestion, then a discussion, then a plan. Not as it had been, but as something new. A community rescue center, shared, transparent, necessary. Reed remained sheriff. But not the same one. He spoke more, listened more, and when he didn't know, he said so. Delaney became more than a voice. She became the one people turned to when truth felt difficult but necessary. Sadie returned to school quietly, not the same girl, but not alone anymore. She spent afternoons helping organize supplies for the new center. Not hiding, choosing. Wyatt stopped avoiding the town. He didn't become part of it overnight, but he showed up, fixed things, built things, stayed longer. Fenn changed too, not dramatically, but enough. He still reacted to sharp metal sounds, still watched unfamiliar spaces carefully, but he no longer chose the door every time. Sometimes he lay in the sunlight. The lake began to thaw, slow cracks spreading beneath the surface, light reflecting differently each day. That afternoon, Delaney and Sadie walked up to the cabin, carrying bread, still warm. Fenn met them halfway, not rushing, just going. They sat together on the steps, no urgency, no tension, just presence. Fenn settled between them, head resting across Wyatt's boots. For the first time, he slept, deep, unaware, safe. Wyatt looked out over the water, then down at the dog, and finally at the people beside him. He had thought that night in the storm was about saving something, a life, a moment, a decision. But now he understood. Sometimes you don't find what's broken. Sometimes it finds you, and sometimes what you think you're rescuing is already leading you back to the part of yourself you thought was gone. Sometimes we believe we are the ones doing the saving. We see a broken life, a lost soul, a moment of suffering, and we step in, thinking our strength is what will make the difference. But this story reminds us of something deeper, something quieter, something closer to the truth. Wyatt thought he was saving a freezing dog on a silent road, but in the end, it was Fenn who led him back, to truth, to connection, and to a life he had quietly given up on. That is how God often works, not through loud miracles or undeniable signs, but through seemingly unexpected encounters. A moment that seems ordinary. A path we almost didn't take. A life placed in front of us that gently pulls us back toward who we were meant to be. In our daily lives, we pass these moments more often than we realize. A stranger who needs help. A quiet decision to do what is right instead of what is easy. A chance to listen, to forgive, to stand up for truth even when it costs something. These are not small things. These are the places where grace lives. And sometimes what we think we are rescuing is exactly what God is using to rescue us. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who may need hope today. Tell us in the comments what moment in your life changed you when you least expected it. And if you believe that truth, compassion, and faith still matter in this world, consider subscribing so more stories like this can reach those who need them. May God bless you, protect your family, guide your path, and bring peace into your life, wherever you are watching from.